It's not the most wonderful time of the year because it's a time of loneliness. Loneliness is a real thing. Loneliness can bring real fear and false peace. Some people live far from family. Maybe their kids are away and they can't get home, whether they live somewhere other place or maybe they're away at college. Others dread going to larger gatherings and holiday celebrations, and so they just stay home alone. But loneliness is more than just actually being physically alone. It is a sadness that we feel no one is with us. It's a feeling that we feel no one really cares about us. And we end up doing life by ourselves. I think from time to time we all feel that way. When we lose a loved one, when we experience a broken relationship, or maybe we lose a job, or we lose a place where we live. Or maybe we have to move. Even then, we don't know anyone. Just a look. So I want you there. We're gonna move very quickly. But I want us to look at these 11 people and see how they dealt with their life with and without Christ. Were they alone or not? The first I want us to look at is King Herod. Look in Matthew chapter 2, beginning at verse 1. It says that Jesus was born in Bethlehem during the days of King Herod. And verse 3 says that Herod was asked a question, where is the one who's been born king of the Jews? And Herod responded by being disturbed with that question. You see, King Herod was afraid. He was troubled. He was agitated. This word gives the idea of he panicked. Have you ever panicked before? And even though he wasn't a Jew, he called himself Herod the Great. And he was only known by that title during his lifetime. But we see that Herod felt threatened. His position, his power. Herod had 10 wives. Did you know that? He had 12 children. And he was fearful of his brother, Aristobulus, and so he had him murdered. And then he had his wife murdered. He was afraid of his sons. He had 2 sons that they might take over his power and his position. And so he had them both killed. Herod was a fearful man without Christ. And one of his final acts, he placed several prominent citizens in Jerusalem in jail. And the day that Herod died, he had ordered the edict that they too, those prominent people, would be killed. And he said this, the people will not weep when I die, and I want them weeping, even if they weep over someone else. King Herod was an evil man who was afraid. And all Jerusalem was afraid too. If you go back to verse 3, it says, not only Herod was disturbed, but all Jerusalem with him. Can't you understand why? They too would be afraid. You know, fear can be where it was to take place. They should have been aware of Moses' prophecy about a great prophet coming and delivering. When Jesus began his public ministry, it was the chief priests and the teachers of the law that were his prominent adversaries. They despised Jesus. They didn't want to have anything to do with Jesus. they felt like they didn't need Jesus. They were blind to how sinful they were. They didn't understand that they needed salvation. Do you know people like that in our world today? Then there was the Roman world, just the common world. Turn over to Luke chapter 2. Look at the first verse. It says, in those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. The news could get out to people all across the whole world at that time. Sometimes we think that people, because there was no post office or whatever, no internet, that they couldn't get the message. People got the message around the world. But they didn't get the message about Emmanuel coming. One of the most powerful empires in history was oblivious to the fact that God was sending his son into the world to bring hope and peace and life. Then there was the innkeeper. Go down to verse 7 of chapter 2. Business was filled to capacity. There were no vacancies. So many visitors in town, so many new people coming in, traveling to Bethlehem, needing a place to stay. He was not very sympathetic to this couple from Nazareth. I don't know if he was impatient with them, but he didn't have time to help them find another place to live except a manger. I guess that was good enough, but this innkeeper was busy. Do you know anybody like that at Christmas? Just so busy, too busy to recognize that God. Story, but there's a lady there, an older lady by the name of Anna. And verse 36 tells us that she was a prophet. In verse 37, we read she's older, she's a widow, she's at least 84 years old, and that she never left the temple. That was her home. The temple was her home. She didn't even live in her own place. Who would listen to her about the coming Messiah? Anybody.